Moonshine Jesus, no eye in the sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, no right. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're so glad that you all can join us today. We are brought to you, as always, by ProgressiveChristianity.org, an incredible place for all your progressive Christian resource needs. Check them out and check out their social media as well. Follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, because I guarantee you will not want to miss an episode of the Moonshine Jesus Show. We have so much fun. And I'm here, as always, with my good buddy, Mark Sandlin. How you doing today, Mark?
Doing just fine today. It's going to be interesting to try to delve into our first time ever doing two movies at once.
I know. It's going to be very interesting. We're talking about The Matrix Reloaded, that's Matrix 2, and Matrix Revolutions, that's Matrix 3. And luckily, it's not like these movies are dealing with any complex topics or anything. So I'm sure that we can just put them all in. Yeah, it should take just a couple minutes to cover. But if we're going to get through this, if we're going to try and cover two movies in one episode, we're definitely going to need some drinks to help the flow of this.
Yeah.
Do you have a drink ready, Mark?
I do. And since in the very first Matrix, Deja Vu played such an important role, I'm just repeating my drink from the last time that I named Digital Rain. It's apple juice, vodka, melon liqueur, and sour apple mix. And it has the lovely color of the drop-down letters that we have all come to associate with Matrix, now known as Digital Rain. How about you? What'd you decide to do?
Well, I wondered if you might do that, Mark. And so I was thinking about how important consistency is when you're dealing with a trilogy. And so I also repeated my drink. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that we just have a ton of Prosecco here at the church. But I've got Prosecco that I have put food coloring in to make it this nice Matrix Rain, the green. So cheers to you, Mark. And
cheers, sir.
As we're drinking, just a reminder, if you haven't seen these movies over the past 20 years, we're going to spoil them for you. So let's have another sip. Let's get back into it and talk about two Matrix movies in one episode. Let's do it.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thank you for joining us for our Geek Out segment. We're going to spend a little bit of time kind of letting ourselves get into the fun kind of geeky parts of these movies, talk about it a little bit. We won't spend too much time doing that because we do want to move on. As Caleb's already pointed out, these are very dense movies. There's a lot that we can talk about. Matter of fact, we'll kind of talk a little bit about it probably even in this segment because it's almost impossible not to. I'm curious, Caleb, we both had mentioned that we saw these when they released them, and then we went back and rewatched it. I'm curious, what was your experience of watching it the second time compared to the first time?
Well, the thing that really stuck out to me, because I think I'd seen each of these movies once. And the thing that, although I've seen the original multiple times, and I think the thing that stuck out to me is that it is quite a bit different from the first movie in the trilogy. And I mean, tonally is a little different as well. And so that stuck out to me, which is probably, I think, why I've seen the first one a number of times and the second two only one time. And I noticed that, but I also felt like, the special effects did all the things that we expect from a Matrix movie. I felt like the special effects,
Sure.
even 20 years later, hold up really good, just like we talked about last week with the first one. And, Mark, you kind of framed this for us last week. You said maybe there was more going on here in terms of
Yeah.
narrative than we might have realized even at the time, that there may have
Yeah.
been some gender identity stuff in the midst of this. And so going in with that mindset, the fact that the Wachowskis, came out as trans, and that may have framed the story, that I went in watching it this time with that view, and it helped me to have, I think, a more positive experience of the movies. All that being
Yeah.
said, I still stand by what I said last week. I feel like the first one's real good, second one's pretty good, third one's not as good. That's kind of where I still landed. How about you, Mark? What was your experience after all these years?
There was. I really ended up liking both. Liking the second movie better than I liked it the first time I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
And the third movie, I was kind of remained indifferent, much like I was, I think, the first time I watched it. It was just kind of, I don't know. Although I felt like there were some important parts in it. So
right.
I am interested. So you're saying that the ranking of your three movies is 1, 2, and 3, just like they came out, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly what I'm saying.
I think in terms of viewership, like just viewing it, that would be my ranking too, particularly the first time through. Yeah. I have to say though, in terms of concept, I'm actually going to rank them 2, 1, 3. And and if you'll indulge me, I'm listening. I'll speak on why. I'm not necessarily saying like in terms of how great of a movie altogether it was, but in terms of the concept they're trying to. So in the first one, we've got Neo, who's being given his purpose to be the one. It's sort of the hero's journey. And he identifies with it. We all identify with him because we're so used to getting pulled into the hero's journey. So he has purpose. It's a purpose that's pre-given to him. See, and this is where I like what 2 does.
Okay. In
2, he's searching for his purpose. He's chasing after it rather than it being told what it is. Sort of an existentialism kind of deal, right? Like there's no external source for meaning. It's all self-provided. And in this case, the meaning that he has is his love for Trinity, which, hey, that's pretty good. And then we move to 3, and you get more of this sort of, I don't know, fatalistic, deterministic nihilism kind of stuff going on. You got Agent Smith saying, and I wrote this down so I could quote him. He's speaking of temporary constructs of a feeble human intellect trying to desperately to justify an existence. I mean, talk about nihilism, right? I mean, yeah. And I kind of like Neo's answer to him is ultimately that he's decided to give it meaning. Yeah. In a lot of ways, at first I'm like, yeah. And then I'm like, well, that's pretty cheap. Like, you need to explain why you decided. Like, you don't just do that. And then, like, so anyway, I actually think I like the message of 2 better. That kind of I'm stumbling on that word. Existentialism that's in it. I love that, of finding meaning from the inside. And I particularly like that the meaning that's found is love. I mean, am I reaching too hard?
I like that. I like that. I think I can see that. The other thing about 2 that I had forgotten that made me really appreciate it more is that, last week we were like, they should make a Matrix movie where they're exploring more what the real world is like. And what was that place that they said? Zion? I'd love to see that. Right. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what 2 is actually about.
but that actually is kind of, it actually kind of speaks to how forgettable 2 and 3 really are in some ways. I think
that's right.
I think part of that though is just for the reason you said though, is that we go into 2 really hoping for the whole feeling of the original, and they intentionally decided to pivot on us. And I think the first time I was watching it through, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is true for other people, my disappointment prevented me from realizing that it's sort of good in its own way. It's certainly not the Matrix, the original kind of level of good, but in its own way, it has some value. And I think I spent the whole time being so mad that it wasn't more of the Matrix.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, maybe that was my experience too. Maybe that's why I'm like, I'm not watching this again. And but yeah, I did definitely enjoy it a lot better, and I was struck by a lot of the messaging too. Also, a lot about whether or not you determine your own fate, and I actually appreciated that piece of it a great deal, because you're right that there was kind of a lot of predetermination in the first one that we deal with a little bit more, and the movies together, I think, make the trilogy stronger. It tells a stronger story.
I think so,
and maybe
too.
that's I mean, maybe that's one of the problems that we often face whenever we're dealing with trilogies, is that we do want to look at them as individual movies, and whenever you put them all together, that even the weaker movies, when it's a part of a good trilogy, help to tell a really good story. And so I think about like the Dark Knight trilogy, for instance, where some are stronger than others, but they help to tell a really good story. Or even the original Star Wars trilogy. I know a lot of us would have liked to have seen the third one.
The third one be a little bit stronger,
a little bit stronger, but still, I mean, a really
still
strong
helps tell the
trilogy.
story.
So that's a good point, Mark. I appreciate you pointing us to the trilogy to help us appreciate the Matrix a little bit more. But yeah, all in all, I agree with you. I see your argument, Mark. I think it's a strong argument. Yeah.
All right, fair. So listen, this is another thing that I saw, particularly in the second movie, in the Reloaded. There's two scenes in particular that when I put them up beside each other, I was like, ugh. And it's the scene where he comes out of the elevator and all the folks are waiting for him and have offerings for him, or asking for prayer requests and blessings. And that's not that far removed from when one of the folks on the ship speaks of Neo and says he's doing his Superman thing. So my question is, talk a little about this conflation that happens a lot, where our savior figure has to be more of a Superman kind of figure. That happens a lot. What do you think of it? Is it good for us? Why do we get it? I know it's a lot, but I'm curious.
I don't think it's good for us, but I do think that that's what we've always done. Even if we look to like different cultural myths, like Greco-Roman mythology, and even the way Christianity has treated Jesus, that we like to make people into superheroes. And I think in a lot of ways, because it kind of lets us off the hook if we think, well, somebody who's great can do this, then of course they can do it, but we can't do it. And so I think that like that's something that happened early on in Christianity, because if we believe that Jesus was just a really extraordinary human being who lived his life in a way that was God-filled and was constantly caring about the presence of others. That requires a lot of us. If that's who he called us to be, it's a whole lot easier to believe that, well, Jesus was God, and so of course he could do all those things. And so as long as I believe that he was God, then I'm fine.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a whole lot easier, which is why I think we switched from the religion of Jesus to the religion about Jesus real quickly, because it required less of a commitment. So no,
less
I don't
sacrifice.
think it's good. Yeah, I don't think it's good to be Superman, to make anyone into Superman, because all of us are human beings. And if we all recognize that we're human beings and we try to work together, I think we're a lot better off. So no Superman for me. How about you?
I completely agree. I don't like the fact that the folks, the people who are supposed to make society better in the long run, have to be the strongest and the fastest and the best. If anything, that's part of what the Matrix is fighting against, is that you're sold this, when you're in the Matrix, when you're in the world as you know it, you're being sold this bill of goods, which is kind of creating you who you have to be. Your identity is being given to you. And we should be looking for heroes where the hero goes inward and finds things that have real value to help make the world a better place. We definitely need that. Listen, we could go on and on. I had 3 more questions to ask you,
Of course you
actually,
did. Yeah.
but we need to go on and move into our theopolitical segment so we can talk a little bit about some of the interesting theological and political perspectives that are found in these 2 movies. So we'll take a quick drop and we'll be right back on the other side.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're entering our Theopolitico segment as we talk about the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Revolutions. So, Mark, last week you mentioned that both of the Wachowskis are trans now, and that these are movies that should be seen through a trans lens. And I was listening to Lily Wachowski speaking about this, and she said The Matrix is a trans story, and it's about the realization that becoming a new person is possible. It's about the desire for transformation. And so we've got characters like Switch, who's a man in the real world, and a woman in the Matrix. And so my question is, Mark, what stories are providing hope for trans individuals today? Do you see narratives coming through pop culture or elsewhere that are uplifting for trans folks? And how can the church be supportive of trans folks?
Yeah. Well, I would say right off the top of the head, I don't get pulled to any specific stories. What I get pulled to are younger generations who are telling their own stories and are being supportive of each other telling their own stories. For me, that's where our real hope is that it's become, for the younger generations, it's become such a normal part of their culture that it's not even an unusual thing or celebrated. Look how great we are at supporting trans culture and trans folks. It's really just embedded in the culture. It's who they are. It's normal. It's just as normal as anything else. So I find a lot of hope and help in that having occurred, because in the Matrix, what we see is people who are trying to choose a different life or turn inward and figure out who they actually are, but having to go through a great deal of suffering and struggle in order to get there. And the younger generations are creating a culture where that's not so necessary, where it's more accepted. And if anything, you find some more support than you might have in other generations. So I kind of love that. And I think that's what the church needs to be doing. We need to be making sure that we are always looking at everything through a filter of love and celebrating folks, giving particularly naming ceremonies and things like that that help really mark these moments in life that are defining and purposeful. And we need to come together when we do that and realize that without it, we aren't doing the job that we're supposed to be doing. We're not focusing on loving all folks and helping folks be as healthy as they can be. I rambled a little bit there, but I got a little excited about how good things comparatively are becoming in younger generations.
Oh, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of hope in younger generations who just see being authentic as normative. And wow, that's
absolutely
theologically powerful. I think that I find some hope in seeing not specific stories, but seeing more trans folks involved in the creation of movies and media, normalizing trans folks. I think that that's powerful wherever companies can do that, production companies can do that, directors can do that. I think that's really important to get trans folks, especially if they're trans characters. Let real trans folks play those characters. I think that's important. And I think churches, even churches that say they're accepting, I think a lot of churches have work to do on accepting people, like, especially as people are transitioning and stuff. Like, I've heard even in open churches, people make comments about like the clothes that people wear as they're transitioning, or wigs or things like
Right.
that. And if churches are really going to be welcome, inclusive, affirming kind of places, especially if they claim to be and then don't really live that out,
Right.
that's real problematic. So I think churches need to do a lot of work in saying, hey, support people in their journey. Just be kind, generous people. That's what
Right.
Jesus told us to do and be. Okay, so in the Matrix Revolutions, I always have a hard time with that name. Revolutions.
Lucians.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the machines and Neo work together to defeat a common enemy in Smith.
Yes.
In The Matrix Reloaded, Neo has a conversation with one of the council members about the difference between the machines running the colony and the machines that are controlling the Matrix, primarily the issue of control. So
Yeah.
here's my question, Mark. We're at an age when artificial intelligence is growing by leaps and bounds. What is the best way for human beings and machines to coexist? If you could
Oh,
solve that problem for us, I'd appreciate it.
yeah. That's easy. I'm glad someone finally asked me. I've been waiting for this.
I know. You have policy prepared to go to Congress, right? I'm sure.
Right, right. I mean, I think the first thing to recognize is if you talk to the folks who are the most knowledgeable about AI and that kind of thing, is that we are just not going to get to the point of being self-aware the way that we kind of worry about in movies, which really makes it problematic and starts causing a problem. So it's basically not going to happen. But I do think it's important to look at from a standpoint of what are we using our artificial intelligence, all of these different ones that have been made, what are we using them for, and how do we best utilize them? Like, we should be using them to lessen the burden of stuff that's sort of busy work for humans, and freeing humans up to do more creative, interactive, communal type things. And so far, there feels like there's a bit of a struggle going on in how we're going to play that out and what's ultimately going to win out. But for me, one, let's not panic. It's not going to get to the point that they're self-actualized in any way. That's just going to happen. But two, let's be more analytical about what we are using it for. It could be a great tool to free up some of the busy work. Well, again, that's something that the Matrix would kind of point us towards, how important it is to stop having all the pressures of life become so indoctrinating that we can't be who we actually want to be, and instead allow them to free up our time so we can be more of our creative selves and express ourselves more freely, which is also part of what Matrix ultimately is about, is expressing exactly who you are freely. So that's my answer. What do you think?
I think that sounds like a good rubric to let AR or AI help us in places where it's helpful, and not in places where it's not, and not helpful. And certainly, like, if it is enlivening human creativity, I think that that's good. And if it is diminishing human creativity, then that's not so good. And so I think it is mainly being cognizant of how we're using it, not using it blindly. And I think that's something that's good to say about tech in general. Like, let's think about why we're using it and how we're using it. And I think just being aware of it is important. So I want to talk about what did
I said? No doubt, I agree with you.
Oh, no doubt. Yes, absolutely. So another question, Mark. Choice is an important theme throughout these movies, and we get the notion that that choice is something that we might have or we might not have. And Merovingian says choice is an illusion created by those with power. And I was curious about that statement, Mark, as it applies to our political situation in the United States. Is it true that a lot of our choices are made for us by people in power, or do we ultimately have freedom of choice? Because it seems to me that that's something that's at the heart of many of our political conversations.
The answer would be yes. So, yes, choice is something that the powerful give us the illusion that we have, but that's only because we play within their system, that we allow them to set up the system and the structures that we operate within. And if we do that, then yes, choice is a myth. You are only playing the game that they want you to play. You're only making choices that they want you to be able to choose between. What we have to do is be able to step back far enough that we see how those systems are being set up, how they're being structured, recognizing the places that it causes unhealthy community and unhealthy interaction between each other, and then making choices that are outside of the bounds of what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, one of the themes in Matrix is that it is in paying attention to the things that they don't want you to pay attention to that you're ultimately able to break out and to begin to make better choices. So that's why I say, yes, it's both answers. Yes, it is an illusion of a choice if you work within the system. If you're willing to analyze the system and jump outside of it, then no.
I think that's right. I agree. I would also add that I think that some people have more choices than others. And if you're living in a place of real economic depression, that your choices tend to be much more limited. And I think that that is by design. That you're right, that the way you step out of that is by advocacy, by social justice work, by trying to change policy and stuff like that. But it's also designed so that the people who need to be most engaged in the political process aren't able to be most engaged in the political
100%.
process because they're working 3 jobs and all of that. So I agree. I think it's a both and. One more question about destiny, because I know we're about to our time here.
Okay.
So there's again a lot of talk about fulfilling destiny, and Morpheus even says, "Tonight is not an accident. There are no accidents. We've not come here by chance. I do not believe in chance. I do not see coincidence. I see providence." Yet it ends up not being like predetermined. It ends up all being about choice, not fate. So I'm curious, Mark, in 30 seconds or less that we have in this segment, what does that tell us about faith? That it is choice, not fate.
That faith is choice, not fate. Yes. What it tells us is that the real heart of faith is to give life meaning. And not having choice is the perfect way to take away meaning from anything. So having choice gives meaning to what we do, particularly when we make choices that are better for all folks. Because when you're making choices that hurt other people, you're also limiting the choices they have. And we should always be working towards places where we're creating more choice for everyone.
I think that's a great.
That's about as short as I could answer that.
I love it. That was 30 seconds or less, and I love that. Yeah, so I agree. I mean, I think that so often we think in Christianity, or the narrative in Christianity, is that God has everything already planned out, and I think that that's problematic. And a lot of times people will say things like, this is all a part of God's plan. This is all happening for a reason. And that just doesn't hold up to intellectual interrogation. And that if we believe that we have a choice, but if our choices are grounded in our faith in the teachings of Jesus, that is a much more sustainable and intellectually honest position. So I would love to talk about a bunch more of the themes, because we've got 2 movies worth of themes here.
Right.
But if we do that, we won't be able to get to our favorite segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment. So let's wrap this on up, grab a drink, and come back and try and make each other look stupid.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome back to the final segment of this week's Moonshine Jesus Show, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, where we try to either make our co-host look stupid or make them make a prediction that makes them look stupid, or ask a question that makes ourselves look stupid because we really don't know the answer to it. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of a silly question, but it's also, I'm curious as to like how you're going to approach it. So in the second movie, the end of the world that the architect speaks of is actually nothing more than a reboot.
Mm-hmm.
What are the odds that that is true for our reality?
That, you know what, so one thing that I think is really interesting about this, is that we talked about this before, that literally when we die, our atoms become something else. It's like a literal reincarnation.
Yeah.
It's not the karma stuff, but
Right.
I don't think that the Earth is literally rebooted, but the fact that the universe is billions of years old, older than we know. Is it possible that there's been life in other places that has already lived out and become extinct? Absolutely. And even before the earth was ever formed. And so I think that in that case, in that situation, that absolutely there's probably been life somewhere else out there even before the earth came around, and here we go. Now, I don't think that that God causes the reboot, or that any savior figure causes the reboot. But is it true that the universe is more expansive than we know, and that there's probably been cycles of life and death and rebirth before? Yeah, I think so. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, something has to happen to our energy and to all the molecules that go into making us up. And it does experience new life. There is a sort of reboot to that gets to happen. And so, yeah, it's just not what we would like in fantasy movies, make it like a full reboot where you're reestablishing the exact same thing. But there's certainly reboot, new life, resurrection. And that's a beautiful thing, man. That's a beautiful thing. There's a lot of hope in that in its own way. So. All right, sir.
I love that. Okay,
fire away.
So I want to take another quote from Morpheus because, I had my perception of Morpheus shifted from the first to the second movie. Like in the first movie, he seems so wise and all-knowing, and then the second movie seems like he's real misguided in a lot of ways, and has a lot of misunderstanding in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that Morpheus says is, it's not a matter of hope. It's a matter of time, because he believed that the salvation of humanity was inevitable. And I'm curious about your perception of that, especially as it relates to humanity and perhaps the Christian faith. Is it a matter of hope, or is it a matter of time? I mean, are we in a place where eventually everything's going to be fine? We just need to wait it out? I'm curious about this.
Again, my answer is yes. It is a matter of hope and time. As Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So in time, there is hope. Just in the reality that we see, that's where things go. And we need to hope in the moment in order to get there. And part of the hope means reacting to where we want it to go. Hope is thin and meaningless if it's all internal and doesn't impact us in a way that it makes us go out into the world and try to exact change to make hope more real in every moment. So yeah, it's both for me. We've got to hope in the moment. We've got to use that to move us towards action, and that action should bend the long moral line of the universe towards justice. So how's that for an answer?
You just will not accept my false dichotomies that I keep giving you.
Of course not.
Will you?
That's pretty funny, because one of the things that Matrix has sometimes been accused of is constantly presenting these dichotomies rather than showing that it's a larger, multiple choices. And I think that's a pretty fair red pill, blue pill, machines, humans, like that's pretty fair critique of them.
I think it's fair too, and I wonder if that has to do with the Wachowskis coming to terms with their own gender identity
sure.
and an either or kind of thing, especially in the '90s, early 2000s, when all of society was thinking about gender as a binary and not a spectrum.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I think hope is important, and I don't think that everything working out okay is inevitable. Like I think most of Christendom does. I think a lot of Christianity thinks Jesus is going to come riding in on the clouds, and it doesn't matter what we do as long as we believe in Jesus, he's coming. And I don't think that's right. I think that the future is yet to be determined. And if we are hopeful about the future, it can encourage our actions. I think, in fact, living into a better future is only possible if we have hope and if we proclaim a hopeful vision of the future. And so I guess that's where I land. I think that hope is much more important than Morpheus thinks it is. And I think even in the movie, it was more important than he knew it was. So
I completely agree. I think I'm with you on your answer as well. So I hope that we can come up with a very good theme for next week's show.
Yes.
And I think that I have the answer for us.
Okay.
Because, and I mentioned this at the end of the last show, is that this weekend, the follow-up to Joker comes out, Folie à Deux. And it is supposedly, everything I've heard, absolutely amazing. We've got Lady Gaga in it. The trailers look incredible and interesting. Yep. So if you're in, I think that's the direction we go next week.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing a Joker musical. And also that lets me know that I've got a week to practice my French pronunciation, because you did that. You pulled that off really well, Mark.
I did not think I did, but I appreciate that.
I'm impressed. I'm going to practice.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that said, we appreciate all of you who are here with us this week on the Moonshine Jesus Show. It's because of you that we get to do this, and it is like the highlight of our week. So thank you. And that being said, we will see you next week on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine